You know, when we talk about Black storytelling in America, we're not just talking about art. We're talking about power. And historically, that power didn't belong to us. From the earliest days, stories about Black life were usually told by people who weren't Black, which is kind of like letting someone who's never tasted jerk chicken write the recipe. Spoiler alert, it's bland. In literature and film and in theater, the lens was controlled by outsiders. Blackness became a character, a trope, a symbol, and not the good kind of symbol, like Beyonce at the Super Bowl, more like tragic figure or comic relief. These weren't stories for us, they were stories about us, packaged for someone else's comfort. But even in those constraints, Black creators still found ways to speak. Think the Harlem Renaissance. People like Zora Neale Hurston and Langston Hughes writing with voices so authentic they practically jumped off the page and said, "Excuse me, I'm reclaiming my humanity." They weren't just telling stories, they were flipping the script. Still, the question lingered. Who is the story for? Is it for us to see ourselves fully or to make us palatable to everyone else? Fast forward to Hollywood's golden age. Black actors were more visible, but rarely free. Roles were limited to servants, caricatures, or the tragic best friend who dies first. And the audience, definitely not Black America. It was white America, consuming a version of Blackness that felt like a sitcom laugh track for systemic racism. But here's the shift. Today, Black storytellers hold the pen, the camera, the mic. From August Wilson's stage to Ava DuVernay's lens, from Barry Jenkins' intimacy to Ryan Coogler's Dance with the Devil, these works aren't asking for permission. They're speaking to us first and letting the world listen in. That's the power of self-definition, when the audience isn't imagined as them, but as us, complex, layered, uncontained. Black storytelling isn't a genre. It's a continuum, a fight for truth, for voice, for the right to be seen beyond the margins. And as we look at where we've been and where we're going, the question isn't just who gets to depict Blackness, but who gets to define it. Because the answer to that shapes everything on the page, the screen, and in the hearts of those watching. We know the problem. Now, let's get to the root of it. I'm Paris Alston, and this is Rooted. Right now on Rooted, playwright Zora Howard joins us to talk about her gripping new play, Hang Time, a story that explores friendship, masculinity, and the weight of choices in a single unforgettable moment. Let's check it out. What happens when three brothers shoot the breeze under an old, wide tree? That's the premise of Hang Time, Pulitzer Prize finalist Zora Howard's latest work, making its Boston debut at Emerson's Paramount Center. The play is a poetic, haunting meditation on masculinity, brotherhood, and vulnerability. Zora joins us now. It's so nice to see you, Zora. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
So Hang Time opens with three Black men. They find themselves suspended under this tree in a kind of timeless space. What drew you to that image, and what does it symbolize for you?
That's a great question. I think it's an image of violence. These men are suspended under this tree, their lives having been flattened. And what inspired it was the story of two brothers, Malcolm Harsh and Robert Fuller, back in 2020, who had their lives taken. And upon coming across those news stories, which were very brief, I couldn't stop thinking about the lives they led up until that point, up until their untimely ends, and how there was so little coverage on that. There was a little bit about, their families, their dreams, all of the things that might have been ahead of them. And I was thinking a lot about this legacy of racialized violence in our country, and how it is perpetually, with us.
Mm-hmm. That strange fruit.
That strange fruit. And wanting to center the men, wanting to center their lives and not their death without looking away from the violence, forcing us to confront the violence and spend time with it, but with not without considering these men and their full lives. So that's really the inspiration of the concept and that first image that you walk in on.
And what does this teach us about Black male identity and Black male brotherhood?
Oh, I'm not sure if it's trying to teach anything, but just invite us to listen, to bear witness, to pay attention, to really look and consider. I keep on using the word consider because these men's, their bodies are the set piece. It is the design of the play. So to look closely and see brothers, like you said, to see fathers and husbands and good friends and just to spend time with them. Maybe that's the teaching, to be open to spending time with these Black men.
What keeps us from doing that when these things, like the incidents that you describe, happen in real life?
We want to look away. We don't want to consider our own complicity in this violence, in this perpetual violence. It's more comfortable, it's easier to walk past, keep on walking by. But we really do a disservice to ourselves and to these men and women and children, all who are victims of racialized violence in this country. And it really obstructs us from any path forward of healing the violence or the wounds from the violence.
Now, obviously, this is a very visceral image, right? When we think about the history of lynching of Black men in the U.S. And some people might say, why are we resurfacing that imagery in any way? But what would be your response to that?
It's not resurfacing. Resurfacing would suggest that it was buried somewhere, that it's not in plain sight for us right now in 2025. A couple of weeks ago, DeMartravian Reed was found hanging in Mississippi. That's not resurfacing. That's, within this month. And it's a folly for any of us to think that this is something of our past, of a different time, of a different part or specific part of this country. This is right now. It's extremely urgent. And for us to think that it is not, that is a great danger.
Mm-hmm. You've noted how your inspiration for this has come from your own relationships with men in your family, your brothers, your cousins, your father. How did you think about them when you were writing this?
I mean, these are the men I grew up with, and, their voices, their laughter, just always with me. It's in my head. So just, being in the corner of the room when they think they're having private moments, and I'm hearing some of the banter and the back and forth and the way that they talk when it's just them, when it's men amongst men, having the privilege of being privy to some of that and then, being inspired to fill in as well. They're very present in the play, even though, I'm not necessarily writing these characters specifically after any one person in my life. I think they are composite characters of so many of the men and souls that I've known in my walk.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Now, when we think about theater, right, and people who maybe stereotypically go to theater, we may not necessarily see that being as accessible to Black men. But how do you hope that this opens or changes that stereotype and invites more Black men to be part of this art?
I always thought about Hang Time being, yes, a theatrical piece, but also something that could happen on a street corner or, in the center of a park, on a basketball court. It's the work of the institutions. We have a lot of work to do in making sure the doors are open and encouraging folks to come inside. But I hope once they get through those doors that they see themselves, that they feel cared for, considered, that there's a deep appreciation for these men written into the story and the characters of this piece.
Have you heard or spoken with any Black men who saw this and what their thoughts were afterwards?
Absolutely. I mean, yes to audience members, and then yes to, there's been a number of actors who have come through the piece, all Black men, of course. And so just it's really rewarding to speak with them and to hear the words on them, because, obviously when I'm writing it, it's just happening in my head. But to hear it animated and to see it animated, they know these men. That's kind of the feedback I get. They know these men. These are their uncles, and they're barbers. They see themselves in it, and that's the biggest reward, I think, when I get to talk to folks after the show.
Mm-hmm. So you have already toured with Hang Time nationally. We've got a real treat, obviously, with it making its Boston debut. But where do you see this going in the future?
As many places as possible. I think Hang Time is an American play. I say that often, that this legacy is not specific to one place or time. It's all time, all places, particularly in this country. And so every city that would have us, I'd like us to be there. Internationally, if they'd have us, I'd like us to be there.
Have you already taken this to the South at all?
Yeah.
How are you thinking about that?
We would love that to happen, and it's not for lack of trying. It is still something that we need folks to say yes and to be open to hosting us and making the play, working with us, collaborating with us to make the play happen. But nothing. The South is not off the table. That's what I'll say. We'll continue working to try to get this play as many places as we can.
Mm-hmm. So, as a playwright and director, what kind of stories do you feel called to do next? And how might the work that you've done on Hang Time inform those stories?
I just want to continue telling the truth in the way that I can, in the way that I understand and observe the truth. I love working with rich, dynamic, complicated characters. That's really at the center of all that I do, no matter what the story is, that I'm usually first drawn to the character. I'm a Black woman. I'm telling Black stories. I don't think there's more to it than that.
Mm-hmm. And how do you hope that stories like the one you tell with Hang Time influence American theater at large?
I think, yes, there is the concept. Yes, there is confronting what is, uncomfortable, what we have a hard time confronting or would rather not confront, the stuff that the dirty stuff, the nasty stuff that is not so pleasant to sit with. I think Hang Time is also trying something subversive with form. It's not, your traditional, straightforward play. It's a little bit more experimental in its form. And I think we want more room for experimental work. We want more room for experimental work by people of color. We want more experimental, right? We need to kind of break down the traditions and the structured systems that tell us expressing has to look like this. Storytelling has to come in this format for it to be marketable or sellable, or whatever the case may be. There is a time and place for that as well, but there's obviously a time and place for stories like Hang Time. And we just need to make more of it. We kind of nudging ourselves in there. We get in the crack. We just need to push the space open wider, because I feel like that's, for me at least as a theater goer, that's the stuff that makes me want to lean in. That's the stuff that moves me and changes me and inspires me. And I know I'm not the only one writing these stories and building these kinds of plays, so we just need to make more room. There's enough room for all of us.
Well, Zora, thank you so much for sharing your vision and your voice with us.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. I hope you come see the show.
Thanks so much to Zora Howard for that powerful conversation about Hang Time and the ways it explores Black masculinity and friendship. Now we turn to another story about representation, this time behind the camera. Filmmakers Dan Algrant and Don Wright join us to talk about their documentary Cathedrals and how Don, as a Black man, is helping shape his own narrative in a space where those voices are often missing. Right now on Rooted, we're joined by filmmakers Dan Algrant and Don Wright, co-creators of the powerful documentary Cathedrals. Nearly 50 years after their first film together, they reunite to explore race, memory, and the legacy of a Boston housing project through the eyes of those who lived it. So Don and Dan, thank you both so much for being here.
Thank you
For having us.
So the original Cathedral film was in 1976. It was about the cathedral housing projects in Boston's South End. What did you two set out to accomplish with that first project?
That's a great question, because a lot of what we set out to accomplish, we had to figure out together. And that meant that we had to meet and spend a lot of time discussing that, and so that became part of the process. And a lot of that was done while also we were waiting for the camera to arrive. You know, we were trying to raise funds. And then, you know, I don't know what it was like for Dawn to have me from this sort of prestigious, in quotes, prep school coming into the neighborhood and saying, I'd like to make a film about the projects with you. What do you think? I don't know what that was like, but it probably was not something that happened every day.
What was it like, Don?
So what that was like, I was already, you know, filming for the Harriet Tubman House at the time, and there was a group of us who were learning, you know, how to film. And then we were approached by the staff about having an intern come, you know, to the community and be involved in what we were doing at the time. And so it was a time when tensions were pretty high in Boston, you know, and in the Cathedral projects was one of those projects where we didn't really face a lot of racial diversity because the project was racially equal
Same.
at the time, you know? So we didn't have that problem like other projects in Boston had. But the idea of some guy coming to be involved in our community, most of the time, that was a no-no, that we wouldn't form to that because we were, you know, taught that people want to come to your community and learn how you live, see how you live, you know, and so, but in this case, because it came from a prep school, because it came through the Harriet Tubman House, I remember the group of guys and myself, we were very welcoming to have someone come who I didn't know what we were going to do, and he didn't know what we were going to do. But it ended up being about this 10-year-old boy, and it just went on from that.
And that 10-year-old boy was Kevin Dames.
Correct.
Yes.
Who had suffered a burn injury due to some faulty heating pipes in his housing unit. And so Kevin, obviously he's not...
Illegal heating pipes.
Illegal
Right,
heating
yeah,
pipes,
right.
not faulty,
Right,
but
yeah,
illegal. And so Kevin is a central figure to the first and second iteration of the film. And Dan, you had somewhat of a journey trying to get back in touch with him. Tell us about that.
Well, it was these are hard times, you know, and the times we live in, I feel, and they've been gradually becoming more difficult. And about 5 years ago, I found this film in my garage, and on a tape that was probably not functioning anymore, and it was during the COVID, and it was a time when I also was watching the Floyd murder trial on television, and I thought, wow, this film has been sitting here. This country is not getting much better, you know? And I took a look at I had the film restored and watched it, and it felt more powerful than it did at the time. And I thought, well, if I could take the risk at 16 years old, I should be able to take the risk at 60 years old to try to find out what's really going on in the country, and in this particular way, with these two guys who I had such a great time with. I mean, it was a very positive experience, and you know, it wasn't always that, you know, trust comes from time. But in this case, we had like a year together, and then there are 45 years in the middle where we had no contact. And
Why
so,
was that? Why did those years go by and neither of you had been in touch with each other?
well, that's what I wanted to know. I wanted to understand what that's about, and I see it all over the country. I see people sort of getting older and getting sort of isolated into their own sort of pods, I'll say, but also it's race-oriented and it's class-oriented, and people just start to separate. And this country now is at its highest level of separation, and so I felt that I wanted to try to do something about that.
Don, what about you? was that gap? What explains that gap?
So I would have to say that if for me, like I was involved in a lot of community service. So this was just another entity that had come along, and I did this thing with this guy. And in the beginning, there was like 5 of us from the project who had come together, and by the end of the time, there was 2 of us, and by the end of that time, it was just me at the end. And
me, both of us. There were 2 of us. There was only 2 of you. Sorry, there was just...
Yeah, at the end, there was Dan and I at the end.
Mm-hmm. But you were the only one from
right.
the project.
But I was the only one from the project that had stuck with it. And that seems to be somewhat part of my bigger story, is that I like to see things to the end. And this one, I didn't see to the end after I went back to Andover, Phillips Academy, and we showed the film to the students there. And I got a copy, and my world began to go in a different direction. But I had always had this thing in my heart about, I need to let this kid, Kevin, when he was 10 years old, see this recording of himself. And that didn't happen. Life's changes began to happen, and I moved away from Boston. A couple years later, I went to Western Mass, and I never returned back to Boston. And so the copy of the film, have no idea what happened to it. Probably left it at my mother's house in the project, moved on, and that was that.
And Kevin didn't remember being filmed, which is also extraordinary. So it's on both of us that we didn't really show the film to him. And that comes up in the film, in the new film. And it becomes part of our journey together.
So we have a clip of the moment that you do come across Kevin, and here's the conversation that you two have.
10 years. No, I've been 100% for 6 years. I'm sorry. I just became 100%. Hey, what's up there, big guy?
100%.
All right, good.
100% means 100% sober.
Service connected.
Yeah,
yes.
yeah,
No,
yeah.
100%
Oh, service.
connected.
I see.
Yeah,
yes, sorry.
I'm retired. I don't.
I get it. Yeah.
And that's one thing. I know I did a lot of things, been through a lot.
Yeah.
Hey, but God's got me here.
Yeah.
Without Him, I wouldn't survive Desert Storm.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have survived my seizures. I wouldn't have survived today. I wouldn't be sitting here, conversating, doing this right now.
The seizures come from just being stressed out, or
they haven't found it. Well, it's from head trauma, in the military, and stress, and like you said, like you heard the gentleman about the burns.
Yeah.
It affects a person. It affects me a lot in my life.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Mentally, emotionally.
Yeah.
Because it scarred me for life.
I understand.
It scarred me. No, you don't understand.
Well, you know what? I totally don't.
No, you don't understand. So, not to be funny, but I dislike when a person says they understand, and it's like.
So, Dan, I was so curious when I saw that clip what that moment was like for you when Kevin very straightforward was like, no, you don't understand. And then, of course, you had that moment where you were showing him why you could empathize. But what did that moment teach you about the relationship between filmmaker and subject?
It taught me that you have to listen, and that it's and also that, and the film becomes partly to say this, that when you have a conversation with someone, you get to, and Kevin does, and I do, make a second draft of what you say. People are so afraid right now to talk to each other at all. They're afraid to reveal their own feelings because they think, A, they don't want to have an argument, they don't want to have, or they just know already what they're feeling. But the truth is, when you ask someone a question, and you have to be prepared to hear the answer, but then, and it's said in the film, you should be able to have the ability to say it again and have learned why you might have hurt that person or misunderstood them or not been clear. And that's the way people can make progress, learning about what another person is like.
And there's even a bit of redemption because you come to the point with reckoning with compensating Kevin
for his contribution to the film.
Yeah, well, yeah, absolutely. And, that's an extremely important idea. We actually all own the film together. In this day and age, owning a film is different than it used to be, but it is...
Just ask Ryan Coogler.
It's a very important idea of being able to, but it shouldn't stop us from trying to understand what another person is like. And that's, the ownership of a story is important, but it's also important to understand, I feel, like we can talk together. I came back and we went through a lot separately for 40 years, and yet it was almost like for the last 2 years we've been, if you don't mind my saying so, very close since then. And it's taking the risk, and both of us have taken risks here, to realize that you can learn from another person's story even if you don't share all their history, and it's worth doing.
Well, Don and Dan, I want to thank both of you for having this conversation here with me and with our Rooted audience, and I'm excited to see where things go for you. Thank you.
A huge thank you to Zora Howard, Don Wright, and Dan Algrant for sharing their incredible stories with us today. To keep up with Rooted, follow us on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to the Rooted newsletter for more stories that matter. And if you've got tips or comments about the show, drop us a line at rooted@wgbh.org. Until next time, stay rooted, stay seen, and as always, stay tuned.